So this is going to be recorded. We're going to post it on the HAHPERD website. The board still has to decide if it's going to be open for everyone or just for HAHPERD members, but it'll be up there nonetheless. And then don't worry, for today, I have lots of like resources for you embedded in the slides, and I'm going to send the slides out via email to everyone that registered. So you'll have access to all of the slides and the resource documents that I'm going to reference throughout. So don't feel like you have to frantically like write things down. You'll have access to everything. And if you need something else, I'm happy to send it to you. So just be in the moment and engage in the conversation. So I wanted to start with just some Zoom etiquette. So it would be great if everyone could make sure that their microphones are muted for right now, just in case we have something that we're not expecting, like a phone ringing or whatnot, and then it won't interrupt the presentation. So that should be in your bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And then I also wanted to let you know, because it is being recorded, that means that your videos are going to be recorded, like the screen actually does show up. A lot of times it's just the presenter, but if you talk, your video will come. So if you don't want your video to be recorded as part of the webinar, just make sure you turn your camera off. And then also, if you don't want your voice recorded, you're going to have to type in the chat to ask your questions. Haley McCown is a graduate student here studying to be a professor in physical education, and she's going to kind of be monitoring the chat as well as like helping with things. So if she sends you a message about breakout rooms or something like that, it would be great if you could respond to her. You should have down here, there's participants in chat. So you can click on the participants button and you're able to see who all is in the webinar. And then if you click on the chat button, that's where you can chat to everybody. So you can talk to everybody, or you can send specific messages privately to individual people. So feel free to use the chat option as we go out. And if you have questions, you can either use the chat function or you can raise your hand. So in the participants, you should have like a hand raising option, either if you, I can't remember if you right click on your name, or it might be listed under here. I don't have it as a host privilege. So you should be able to raise your hand if you feel uncomfortable just popping in. All right, so those are our etiquette. Yes. As we get going here, Haley, can you? Okay. So we're going to start out with some strategies and resources as well as some ideas. I do have a lot planned, so I'm going to kind of go fairly quickly, but again, there's lots of links to videos on how-tos as well as just information. And if you want to follow up with me because you want more information, I'm happy to do that as well. At the end of the presentation part, we'll have some time for questions, and then I'm hoping to go into breakout rooms where we can be specific for elementary, middle school, and high school, so that all of you can just kind of talk story with each other and see where each other's at. Some of you have already gone back in person. Some of you are venturing to go back in person in the next couple of weeks here. And then some of you are going to be staying online. So I think that that dialogue between those of you that are in this is going to be important. So just a little background about me, so you know kind of where I'm coming from. I taught PE and health for 5 years in the Midwest, both in the elementary and high school setting, although I claim more high school than I do elementary. Of those 5, only 1 was elementary. I've been a teacher educator, so in higher education for the last 9 years. So after getting my master's while I was teaching and coaching, I went back to school to get my PhD at the University of Texas at Austin. And then I was at Wayne State University in Michigan for 6 years before moving back here to Hawaii. And this is my 3rd year here at the University of Hawaii. So I still engage a lot in the K-12 schools, whether it's through just collaborations that I have going on with teachers, but also grant work. So like currently I work on a grant with a large school district in Michigan, and that involves a lot of heavy hand writing of lesson plans and helping teachers out teach in an online environment, and then helping them transition into the physically distanced physical education. And so although I sit in higher ed, I do have a hand in the schools pretty frequently. So I wanted to begin by just talking about how when we teach online or in a hybrid setting, and I'm sure that many of you know this, but good teaching is good teaching. So when we think about best practices, there's certain things that we think about, and those aren't going to change whether we're in person or whether we're online. And so I just wanted to mention what some of those things that we want to make sure that we're checking in on are. Scope and sequence. I'm going to talk a little bit in depth on each of these, but I'm going to talk about scope and sequence, standards, grade and skill level appropriateness, providing variation and choice, communicating to our students, and then making sure that we're delivering instruction and content in an effective manner. So with scope and sequence, you know, in the spring when everything went online very suddenly, it was kind of panic mode, right? Like we panicked, we did the best that we could to provide what we could to students in that time. But then as the summer rolled out and we got back into the school, we had a little bit more time to think. And so I think that it's important as we continue on in this semester and even to plan for future semesters that we make sure that we have a plan, that we know where we started and where we finished, that we really have an idea of that scope and sequence. So instead of just planning by lesson, we want to make sure that we're still looking at that overall picture, aligning it to standards, and trying to build on content, revisiting it, reviewing it, just like we would if we were in our typical gymnasium setting or in our health room setting. It's also important to understand that when you're in an online or you're teaching socially distanced, you're not going to be able to cover everything that you would normally cover in a typical year. And we have to be okay with that. So this isn't a typical year, but what we need to be aware of is what is okay, what's a good amount to cover? Because if we're covering too much, if we're trying to cram too much into too small of a time period, then our students really aren't going to get anything out of that. So it's okay to teach less. And I think that that's important to think about. So as you're thinking about your scope and sequence and what you want to teach, it's still important to make sure that we're being standards based. So if you touch on all standards, that's great. If you want to focus on some standards that kind of stick out for you in that scope and sequence, then that's your prerogative. But obviously make sure that you're choosing things that are going to be relevant to your students, that you can try to progress throughout the semester or throughout the year. And then also when we're thinking about those standards, we're going to talk a little bit today about how do we assess those standards. And that becomes difficult because if we're in a live environment, there's lots of things to consider. Many of us might do assessments while we're observing, right? And so if students are live online, if they have their cameras on, if they have them off, that might prevent a problem or cause a problem. And so how do we assess when all of that is going on? So we might want to think about alternative forms of assessment, and I'll talk about some of those ideas in a little while. Obviously, it's important to meet your students' needs. And so we know what our standards and benchmarks are, but being in the online environment, we need to make sure that we're tweaking those activities so that they're grade and age level appropriate. When we were in the spring, when we were just kind of in emergency mode, I was helping teachers create lessons for kindergarten through 5th grade. Well, that's a really broad range, right? And so when we stepped back over the summer and we started preparing lessons for this fall, we said, okay, we need to make sure that we have smaller bandwidth. So K1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in their particular situation, or maybe it's K2 with some modifications that you're extending learning and modifying learning for your kindergartners. But making sure that you have that age level appropriate content is important. And then also providing variation and choice for students. So a lot of times when students are at home, there's lots of chaos, and sometimes obviously students are going to lack motivation. And so if we can create choice for them, so not give them one thing to do, but maybe they can pick from a choice board or pick from 2 things out of 3 that they have to accomplish for that week, then that's always going to be better and help with motivation. creating activities that help students feel successful. So again, that choice is going to be key in that. And then also trying to make sure that if we have students that need inclusive learning, that we're trying to create opportunities for them, maybe putting visuals on our screens, creating things that they're going to be able to use as well. So clear communication is really key to when we're teaching in an online environment. Just like you need to deliver instruction and content clearly in your gymnasium or in your health classroom, when you deliver it online, it actually has to be even more clear. So you want to make sure that it's clear and concise, it's engaging, that it looks good. You want to make sure that it's culturally relevant and relevant to your students. And then you also want to try to be as personable and relatable to your students as possible to kind of get on, again, that motivation piece. So when we think about an online environment, there's two different types of learning. We have asynchronous and synchronous. So asynchronous is not in real time. Students can kind of self-pace through it. They might have something for the week that they have to get done. It's very flexible in the schedule. And oftentimes there's less technological issues in the moment that you have to be aware of. And then on the other side of that, we have synchronous learning. So this is going to be online, but it replicates the in-person experience. It's obviously creating real-time support for your students. You're able to check for understanding live, and then students can kind of have that social interaction. But I also want to challenge you to make sure that you don't think that it has to be one way or the other. And I think that the most effective forms of teaching can be a combination of both synchronous and asynchronous. So even if you're seeing your students in a synchronous manner, it's okay to still provide them asynchronous content that maybe they have to do when they're not seeing you, or maybe they prepare something before they come to your synchronous class. And they call that kind of a flipped classroom environment, where they do some things like an assignment asynchronous, and then you can come and you have more engagement in your synchronous online learning experience. And that goes for those of you that are kind of in this hybrid mode too, where you have students who are online. You might have students that are now in person. Maybe they're switching by week. Thinking about using both forms of learning to be able to facilitate what you want them to get out of the semester is going to be effective in helping them kind of work towards those goals and work towards those standards. This is important, and I couldn't really figure out like where to put it in the slide deck, but when we think about learning in general, whether it's online, in person, obviously relationships are really important. And I think as I move into like what types of things we can do for asynchronous and synchronous programming, I just wanted to make sure that everyone kind of has this on the back of their mind, that relationships are really important, especially right now, because your students, as well as your fellow teachers and their parents, are going through a lot of trauma. They have a lot of things going on in their life. Things are really stressful right now. So relationships are important, and being understanding is important. And if you can build those relationships in this online environment, or try to capitalize on the relationships that you can build in person, if you get to see your students at some point, that's going to go a long way to kind of supporting that learning for students as they move on throughout the school year. So when we think about asynchronous programming, so again, this is like like when you're not with them live virtually, we can't approach it like we do other programs. It's not the same as in person. So we need to think about what information is going to be the best to deliver in an asynchronous way. And then we need to figure out how we can present that information in a way that's going to make sense for the learners. And as we do all of that, it's important to kind of be consistent. All right. And I'm going to talk about how to engage our students through assessment. So the first thing that I would suggest in an asynchronous or synchronous environment is that you have an online learning platform. So those of you that I'm sure most of you have some type of learning platform, whether it's Google Classroom, whether it's Canvas, maybe Blackboard. Here at the university, we use Lalima. Whatever it is, I would suggest that you use it. And you not only use it for your asynchronous kids, but you use it as just a learning tool for your in-person classroom as well, so that everyone's on the same page. And if by chance we go back to an online environment, you're able to kind of do that in an easy way, because they already have the online platform. They know what it is, everything's posted there, and you use it as a way to facilitate learning. There's a lot of benefits to a course management system as opposed to something like Google Drive. The course management system allows you to post grades. It allows you to students to hand in assignments. Um, so I would encourage you to use some type of a classroom management system over something like Google Drive. But if you don't have anything else to use, or you're most familiar with Google Drive, you could make it work if you needed to. I think some keys to success in this realm is that you want to pick something and stick to it. Um, and it would be great if it's something that other people in your school are using. So, what I've heard from teachers across the nation as I've done webinars over the summer and into the fall is that parents are overwhelmed and students are overwhelmed with all of the different things that teachers are throwing at them to sign up for, and passwords and whatever it is. So as a personal example, I know that my child is a kindergartner in the DOE this year. This is first year. And we've already had a lot of different learning systems, whether it's Seesaw or Google Classroom, or it's a different Google Classroom. And so trying to streamline what you can as a physical education and health teacher and make it match what the other classroom teachers are doing is probably going to be more successful for you than choosing something that they don't use. It's also important to think about the students that might not have access to online learning. So some of you might be in a situation where you're providing non-digital versions of your content. And so if you do that, it's important to think about the organization of that content as well. So we want it organized in our online platform, but you also need to organize it, think about a table of contents, use page numbers, things that are going to make it organized for those that might not have that digital learning platform. So I'm going to click through these slides very quickly, but I just wanted to give you an example of kind of what I'm talking about. So this is just Google Drive. And although it's very organized, you can see like, watch this before using these modules, and then watch, listen, and read. So when you click on that, it like opens up and tells you what to do. It's very organized for a Google Drive, but it also might be confusing for your students. Whereas something like a learning management system where you make sure that everything is laid out. So for my students, I have the weeks labeled. This is actually from last year, but my ones this year have a due date on them. And then I give very specific instructions within them. So they have a checklist for the week, so they know exactly what they're supposed to do. They have an overview, they see their objectives. And then even within the text, I'll often like provide all of the links that they need. Here's where you turn in your assignment. And it says like, click here in big bold letters. Here's where you watch the video. I don't leave it to chance that my students are going to be able to figure out what I mean. I try to put it all there. And a lot of times I even do an introductory video for them so that I teach them how to use the management system, but then I also introduce them to the lesson so that they know what to expect. And that builds on those relationships. So they're not just seeing the screen, they're able to see me as a human being, and I'm able to start building those relationships for people. So the next section is a bunch of tools that I think could help you be successful in engaging your students in an online manner. So I'm going to go over some student engagement tools. I'm going to go over some things that might help you create visually appealing documents, as well as how you might use video with your students. And then this link you can check out later. It's a link to a spreadsheet that has probably over 200 different forms of apps or websites that can help you engage your students, and it's sorted by topic. So like if I want student engagement through discussion, it gives a bunch of platforms that like engage students in discussion. So you can check that out. Some of you, there's probably some that are more helpful than others, but I wanted you to just have the resource. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is Flipgrid, and many of you might have heard of Flipgrid before, I'm just going to, again, briefly go through these as an introduction of something that you might be able to use in your class. So Flipgrid is essentially designed for students to give presentations, to give feedback to each other, to engage in discussion with a video. So it allows them to have that back and forth with each other. But what makes it really great for education is that it was built for education. So you can grade right in the posts. It provides information for you as how many times students posted. For students, it works both on their phone and on a computer or an iPad. So it's really easy to use. So there's a link about Flipgrid, but you can sign up as an educator. And then this is what it looks like once you get in there. You have your different classes set up, and then you click on the class. And in the class, you have your different types of assignments. So this is the introduction that I had one of my classes do. They essentially introduced themselves, and then they had to comment on each other's videos using their own video, just to kind of talk back and forth to each other. And I like to use Flipgrid as an alternative to like a forum or a discussion board, because students really get tired of writing and typing back and forth on a discussion board. And a lot of times in learning management systems, that's only one way that we can kind of have that discussion back and forth. So Flipgrid allows them to use the video and kind of get that visual interaction. Oh, so within, so then once you actually get into the assignment, what you see is each of the students who have posted have their like video here. And this particularly is a presentation that my students did. So Flipgrid is free up to 10 minutes. So they can do up to 10-minute long presentations. And then each of the students has to go in and view the video. They have like a little assignment to it, but then they can also comment on each other's videos. And then within that, so this is what it looks like when they're viewing it. They have, I can go in and give feedback. I can put a rubric in there right away. I can grade it directly from Flipgrid, or I can go in and download a spreadsheet, and I can have Flipgrid tell me like how many times each of my students has interacted within the actual Flipgrid platform for each assignment. And that way you can go in and see, okay, you know, so-and-so has been in one time, they had this many comments, they replied to this many people. So it's really easy to kind of keep track of that interaction. And so this is one way that you can kind of assess your students in their content. You might give them a prompt that they have to do, and they're interacting with students. And so you could assess on engagement. You could assess on the actual content that they're presenting. So that's essentially one way that we might be able to engage our students within the online platform. In this PowerPoint, I gave you some Flipgrid tutorials. So it kind of goes through and tells you how to like set up Flipgrid and how to use it in your classroom. The next tool that I wanted to mention is Edpuzzle. So Edpuzzle is really cool because especially as a professor, I could see it being used more in health education maybe than physical education, but you can create videos, so content that you want your students to know, and then you upload the video to Edpuzzle, and Edpuzzle allows you to add checks for understanding within the video itself. So you actually put like quiz questions inserted in the video. So it gets to the quiz question, they have to answer it before they're able to move on to the next one. And again, it's designed for education, and so it can link to your Google Classroom. Like you can insert the Edpuzzle right into your Google Classroom. It's very easy to use. I think it integrates pretty easily into Canvas as well. And this is essentially what it looks like as you're creating it. All you have to do is click on the spot on the video that you want to insert your question, and it'll ask you what type of question. So it allows like open answer, it allows multiple choice, true, false, and then you put your question, and then you put continue, and then you can add another question. So you just decide like where in your video you want it. So again, another way that you're able to assess your students. I know I make so many videos right now for my students, and one of my fears is that they're never watching them. I can see like on YouTube that they sometimes view them, but I don't actually know how much they're engaging in them. So this is a way to make sure that they're kind of engaging in those videos that you might be posting for them as far as content. So many of you are familiar with PowerPoint and Google Slides, but I think that it's important to think about PowerPoint and Google Slides beyond just doing a presentation. So they can be used to deliver content, knowledge to students, specifically for some of the skills that we might be hard pressed to teach in a virtual environment or even in that hybrid situation. So you can create visually appealing content with PowerPoint or Google Slides where you're able to embed links within the slides. You can show pictures for examples and use text boxes. They're printable, so your students can download them and print them if they want. There's really endless opportunities. And so I have some examples of things that have been made. Most of these are not made by me. They're made by people. I am on a lot of social media, whether it's Twitter, through Facebook with PE Central or Health Teacher Central. They have really great resources out there, and teachers put all this information out there for free. So these are some things that some people from PE Central have posted for free. And then I have some of our own content on here as well. But this essentially is like throwing steps to throwing, right? And all they're doing is using equipment at home to knock things off of a box. And so students, you could give this to your students, make it so what your students have at home, and they could go through the throwing quest. This is a little bit simpler. So this is essentially you're supposed to follow it. So toss, catch, toss, clap, catch, toss, touch knees, catch, toss, touch toes, catch. So just taking your students through that, and you could create a little video that shows them how to use it, and then they could go and practice on their own. But again, those visuals are really important and could be used for an asynchronous or within a synchronous classroom. Here's some more examples of things that you could use in PowerPoint or on Google Slides. So this is at-home physical activity bingo that we used in the spring, where we gave them like 5 down or 5 across, or they had to do an X. So they could choose essentially like which ones they wanted to do depending on it. Again, that choice was really important to help motivate them. We use these a lot as just extra handouts for our students. We do a lot of like yoga and mindfulness with our students right now, especially at the middle school level. And so these are for our kids that are asynchronous. So when they're not with us, they can kind of follow along with those yoga poses. But again, just created in PowerPoint, nothing fancy. Just added some arrows to it and a border. So you can get fancy with PowerPoint and Google Slides if you want. I don't know if you have seen their Bitmojis have really exploded right now. And so you can create virtual gym spaces or Bitmoji classrooms. I have lots of tutorials here as well as some examples that I'm not going to go through, but you can kind of click on those at your leisure. I'm also going to give you access to a Google folder that has all kinds of Bitmoji stuff in it. So like long-handed implements, short-handed implements, pictures of gyms, like things that'll help you create Bitmoji classrooms quickly, I guess, because they take a lot of time to essentially set up, and then you can use the same setup. But in case you're not familiar, how Bitmoji classrooms work is every thing has a different use. So this is actually a project that teachers gave their students at the beginning of the year to help you get to know your students. But then we have different examples here of Bitmoji classrooms where, let's see, each of the things is something for the students to click on, and it goes to something different. So the soccer ball might be a soccer skills, and then the volleyball is volleyball skills. And so you essentially can make this Bitmoji classroom and again, allow your students to have choice. And I think that I've heard some of the resource teachers have been maybe making some Bitmoji classrooms, so they can probably talk about that in a little bit. Jamboard is another tool that might be useful. So Jamboard is like a virtual whiteboard, and it allows students and yourself to interact on the board at the same time. So you could do it live, but you could also do it asynchronous. And again, it's another way for students to interact with each other outside of a video or outside of a discussion board. So I have some tutorials here, but I also wanted to give you an example of what a Jamboard might look like. So I do a lot of research around comprehensive school physical activity programming and kind of integrating physical activity throughout the school day. And so one of the activities that I love to do in my college classroom is kind of a gallery walk where I hang big sheets of paper up, and my students walk around the classroom and kind of give their ideas about different types of things, such as quality physical education, before and after school clubs, etc. Well, obviously we're online, and so I had to figure out a different way to do that activity, and Jamboard was how I did that. So I essentially started with 5 sticky notes: quality physical education, before and after school, during school, staff involvement, and family and community engagement. And then the assignment was for my students throughout the week, because we were asynchronous this week, to go in and they had to put in things that they felt fall with under each of those categories. And they weren't allowed to use something that somebody else had already put, but they had to add to it. And then at the end of the week, they had to go back and look at all the different ideas. And then they had to write a reflection and choose their favorite 2 from each of the categories about how they might integrate physical activity throughout the school day and not just through a physical education class. So this could be used in many different settings, whether it's health education and you're trying to engage students in content and help them kind of learn content with or skills within health education, or it could be used in a physical education environment too. Maybe you could do something around simple rules or health related fitness. Maybe they have to come up with activities that fall under each of the health related fitness categories. Again, it's just another way to try to engage your students rather than having them write an assignment by themselves and turn it in. So this one I haven't used personally, but it's really trending on social media right now, and teachers seem to really like it. So I wanted to introduce it to you. It's called Nearpod, and basically it's an interactive slideshow. So it's like PowerPoint or Google Slides, but then it's interactive, so the students see it at the same time, but they can click on it. So like your Bitmoji classrooms can essentially be uploaded into Nearpod, and they can click on it as you're talking. So you might have videos for them to watch and they can click on it. I see Nearpod working well. Some of you are teaching hybrid, where you might have students in the classroom and you also have students at home. And teachers are talking about using this to help engage both sets, where students that are in the classroom can follow along with your screen, but then students that are at home have access to the same things that you're showing on your screen, but it's interactive. So you have like quizzes, they have the links right there that they can click on. So just another thing that you might be able to check out. The last thing that I wanted to talk about in relation to engaging students is this idea of videos. So I think that you probably have the idea of videos down for yourself, and being able to create videos for your students, use them to essentially engage your students, whether it's asynchronous, maybe you're using video in a synchronous manner. So that's all really good. But I would also encourage you to use video as an assessment tool and as a way to engage your students. So have them use free video software such as Screencastify or Screencast-O-Matic. Flipgrid is another one, to upload things back to you. And then obviously you need to make sure that you're having them put it in a spot that's safe. So whether that's a Google Classroom Drive that you have set up, depending on the age group. I wouldn't put things on, I have my college kids put things on YouTube, but I also have very strict instructions about it being unlisted, those types of things. So Google Drive is probably the safest for most of you. So that way it's contained to your own class. And then you could do assessment this way. So students might have to demonstrate throwing or dribbling or whatever that might be at their home spot, and then they're sending the video into you. This is an example. If you haven't used Screencastify, this is what it looks like. You essentially use Google Chrome to record your screen, and you can even put yourself in a video and it saves directly to your Google Drive. You can also upload directly to YouTube from Screencastify. I think that it is 5 minutes. Free version is Screencastify. Screencast-O-Matic, I think, goes up to 10 minutes for, and they all basically use the same type of technology. Okay, I already talked about that. We talked about YouTube. So that's kind of the asynchronous chunk. I wanted to talk about synchronous learning really quickly and just kind of touch on a couple of things. So when we're live with our students, we want to make sure that we're managing the classroom just like we would if we're in person with them, right? And then, like I said before, you can't do everything that you would typically do in your classroom, and so you need to make sure that you're planning appropriate content. But I would still encourage you to have some type of a consistent routine so that students can get used to it. They know what to expect. And that's probably going to help you engage them a little bit better in that scenario. So, starting with some type of an instant activity, having a warm up, having your main activity, a cool down, and some type of a closure, I would still encourage you to use, again, those best practices. Um, it's important that we're differentiating content though. So when we think about content, we have to decide like, okay, are we going to cover knowledge today? Are we going to cover activity? Or are we going to do both? And I think varying that throughout the week is really important. And again, that's more for engagement. If you're always coming on and only lecturing to your students, they're not going to be interested in that, right? If we're always coming on and just doing a live workout, they might not be interested in that. So it's okay to vary what you're teaching so that you kind of keep a pep in their step and keep them guessing as to what they're going to be doing. Just because it's virtual doesn't mean that you don't check for understanding. So using questioning, calling on students, maybe having them in breakout sessions within Google Meets or Zoom, depending on what platform you're using, WebEx. Trying to keep them attentive. So they might not have their cameras on, but you can still engage them by calling on students, making sure that you're asking questions, having them engage with each other. And then, our students are always going to ask questions. So making sure that you kind of have a document up and going that allows you to get back to things if you're not like on task. I mean, I listen to my son's kindergarten classes and their conversations are all over the place, right? So making sure that we're staying on track, but there might be some things that come up that we have to put aside. So having something prepared for yourself to just take notes on and be aware of what's going on is important. Okay. I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna really quickly just kind of tell you that these are here that you can go and look at. I created some what I'll call delivery hacks for live engagement. So just like really important things that we make sure we're doing in that live classroom to be able to engage our students. And some of them are really little, like looking into the camera, but they can go a long way because if you're not um, showing that you're trying to be attentive to your students, and they're probably not going to be attentive back to you. And then also making sure that you're thinking about things like safety, talking to your students about safety in their home environment, camera on or off. Do we require it? In the school district that I work with in Michigan, they have a lot of religious challenges that they work with where they have only females can work out with females. And so if they have these mixed gender classrooms, they have to have the cameras off for religious reasons. And so thinking about culturally relevant reasons why your students might need their cameras off is important, and maybe not demanding those, being sensitive to what their home environment is like. But then in that same aspect, we also still have to hold our students accountable. So how do we hold them accountable? Maybe we have them check their heart rate and record it on a Google Doc, or there's other ways that we might be able to kind of check for understanding, assess that they're doing things. Just even talking to them about being self-accountable, how with your camera off, I'm not able to see you, but it's important for you to hold yourself accountable because that's an important life skill, right? And so having those conversations with your students are important. Okay, some of the board members talked about how they're going back into the live setting soon with their students, or they have already, and how they're struggling balancing this like hybrid live scenario where they're teaching live to students in person, but then they still have students that are online at the same time. So the first thing that I would say to that is that's a really hard scenario to be successful in. And so some of your schools might require this, and that's okay. And so I have some tips for you to try to make that successful. But if you're in a situation where you have any control over what you might be able to do in that scenario, I would encourage you to try to teach those online kids in a different space, whether it's a different hour, whether you're like some type of different live instruction than live at the same time as your in-person class. Because really, when we're juggling those two things, what's going to happen is that neither set of students is getting what's best for them. We're not giving them our best at all. We're just trying to survive, right? So I have some tips for you, but I would encourage you to try to use that asynchronous and synchronous tips that we learned just a minute ago to think about how you might be able to structure that otherwise if you're not forced into that situation. Okay, so if you are in that situation, here's some ideas for you. So you want to be able to balance student engagement regardless of the setting. So in the classroom setting, so if you're actually in a classroom and students are online, I would encourage you to use the chat feature. So maybe assign a chat moderator that is not you. So maybe one student a week is in charge of monitoring the chat. And that might simply just be saying, you know, Miss Centeo, there's a student that has a question on the chat, because oftentimes what happens is we get going and we don't look at the chat, right? And so just even assigning a chat moderator could go a long way to making sure that you're engaging your students that are online in your live classroom. You might want to think about partnering students. So one person that's in person is partnered with somebody that's online, or having groups of 3. So that again, if there's a question, the people that are in person can kind of bring it to your attention. When you use breakout rooms, try to decide, are you going to intermingle them? Do your students have devices that are in the classroom? Or could you use breakout rooms online and small groups in person? Don't just forget about them online. You really need to try to facilitate that. If you're doing small groups in class, you want to also do small groups online. And how you set that up should be thought out ahead of time. So just think about that. Using interactive tools. So things that the interactive tool list that I gave you, there's like Kahoot is on there, which is like a quiz tool. If you're going to use it for the online setting, use something that you can also use in person that students can both interact with. So neither set of students feels out of touch with that. Try to engage your students in everything and give them responsibility. Even your younger students can have responsibilities. So try to think about how you can engage your students to help you make that environment successful. And then also giving brain breaks. So you want brain breaks with your students in the classroom setting. So if you're teaching health, or if you have a knowledge lesson for physical education, making sure that you're using those brain breaks is important. If you're in the gymnasium or on a field and you have to teach with this hybrid setting, which I know some of you are in that situation, here's a couple of tips that might be helpful. I would encourage you to have 2 separate devices. So have one device that's your stable camera for your video purposes for your students that are online to see what's going on. And then one device that's portable with you to be able to connect to your headset so you can mute it while you're like right here, that you're able to like hear. So you have a headset in if students are asking live questions. In most platforms, you're able to log in at least twice. So both in Google, in Zoom, I'm not sure about WebEx, you're able to have those to at least 2 connections. So I would encourage you to try to utilize that. This can also be helpful for screen sharing. So like you can share the live screen as well as you talking, depending on how your other camera is set up. classroom teachers use this function for like document cameras. So you might see them sharing like a book that they're reading, but they also have the camera on their face. So just an idea that might work in the gymnasium or in the field. And I know we have some teachers that are going to talk about this hopefully in breakout rooms. Um, Outline activities for your online learners to complete during each part of your lesson. So I already talked about the clear directions, but like tell them what you're going to be doing in person and then have them follow along in what they're supposed to be doing if it's not identical to what you're doing. And giving them that outline is going to help them kind of follow along. It also helps them if you forget that they're there, right? I've heard that already, like, oh, I totally forgot that they were online and I didn't talk to them. So if you give them something ahead of time, they're going to be able to follow along with your lesson a little bit easier. And I already talked about the chat monitoring. And then some of you are teaching in person. And so I just wanted to real briefly think about some things that you might want to think about as you're transitioning to that physically distanced physical education. There are CDC guidelines to follow as far as sanitation. So sanitation is going to be important. Check with your administration. I'm going to give you some resources at the end of this PowerPoint for some additional Shape America webinars that go a little bit more into this. But essentially, you need to figure out with your administration how and what you're going to be sanitizing and how you're going to sanitize this stuff. So this is my friend Andy. His school bought him this like backpack sanitizer. So it's essentially like he has a sanitizer in the tank in the back, and then he has the wand and it just like sprays. I've seen like hand versions of them as well. So Andy essentially has his equipment spread out outside and he sprays it in between classes. So he's not having students disinfect it. It's a quick disinfector. But again, you need to make sure that the disinfectant that you're using is following CDC guidelines or the EPA. It's approved by the EPA, and that whatever you're using is approved by your administration. Another thing about this one is keeping students' belongings separate. So when we think about locker rooms and if students are changing, I know a lot of you have talked about not using locker rooms at all. So again, that's like really a school level decision, what's going to be going on, where kind of your area is at in terms of risk. But you need to be thinking about those things. And are you mandatory having students change? I would venture on the side of saying no. Create activities that are going to be okay for them to participate in their school clothes, or have them wear their PE clothes to school or at home, if you have them hybrid, whatever that might be. But you probably don't necessarily want everybody in the locker room changing at one time and storing their clothes. Things to think about as far as space. So having 6 feet apart, just like in the classroom, if they have desks, you want home bases for your students in the gymnasium. So whether you use tape or paint, whether it's poly spots, some type of home base is important. And then making sure that while you're in a mask, you can still communicate with your students using some type of a microphone. You don't necessarily have to use the one that is over your head. If that's just too much going on with your face, they have like the little lapel. You can use, if you don't have a microphone already, you can get like an ion block rocker from Costco. That's about $150. And then you can get a Bluetooth wireless mic that can go into it for about $20 on Amazon. And I can send you links to that stuff if you're interested. But there are ways, while you're still wearing a mask, you want to make sure that your students are going to be able to understand and to hear you. And then the last slide is about what activities might we be able to do while being physically distanced. So these are just some ideas that I came up with. This isn't the end all be all list. This is, again, just me brainstorming. It also depends on what equipment you have at your school. So like racket sports, you need to have enough for everybody in that class, or so that they're not switching equipment in like during that class period, right? And then that's if you can figure out how to sanitize that equipment in between. So these are things that have to be thought about individually by school, but just some ideas that are able to happen in physical distance, and get creative. So like this example of foot golf, that's essentially soccer, but you can set it up like ultimate disc golf, where you're, instead of like throwing a frisbee, they're kicking the soccer ball at a cone, and there might be different challenges within that. So soccer is a good one because you're only using feet, there's no hand touching, which might be on their face, and so you can kind of, it's one of the only really team sports that is safe for essentially sharing equipment because you're not touching the soccer ball. Obviously, making rules if you're doing traditional soccer around not picking up the ball would be important. So, just things that you have to think about in that environment. And then I'm not going to go into detail about this, but there are assessment tools that you can use to kind of engage your students beyond what we've already talked about, whether it's quiz forms like Google Forms, which is free, Poll Everywhere, Kahoot, all of those things can be used essentially to help engage your students. And then using the video tools for skill analysis. If you need to measure standards one, where we need to look at skill, then video analysis is a way to do that in that virtual environment. But if you're in person, maybe try to use those times in person to essentially try to facilitate some of that assessment if you have to do it. But again, this is a different time, right? So choosing what content you're presenting is probably what's most important. You don't have to do what you've always done. Maybe thinking outside of the box, being okay with being different this time, this one time, that's going to be okay. And then transition back into a more traditional physical education in the future.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead. So I want to take about 10 minutes for questions, and then we're going to break out into our breakout rooms. So I know that that was a lot of information, but what questions do you have or comments?
But there were some people who opted to stay distance. So the majority are in person, but we do have that. She was talking about that hybrid. So we have mostly in person, but we have like 4 people zooming in. So which makes for some chaos, but we're doing the best we can.
Yeah. So it's going. So what problems would you say you're having with that scenario? More so with the lower kids, or more so with your 6th graders?
Yeah, it's harder for the lower. Oh, sorry.
We can still hear you.
Yeah, so it's harder for the younger kids. You can't really do self-directed. You know, with the 6th graders, I can give them the slides and say, you know, go and work on this on your own and break out and just report back to me. But for my 3rd graders, you know, I can't really do that. So what happens is they kind of just watch what we're doing. I mean, we warm up together. That works, you know, where we're doing the warm up. But then when we do the activity, sometimes it's hard to, you know, coordinate where it's, you know, I can do it and it's, you know, where it works for both. Because sometimes something in person doesn't work for the people at home.
Definitely.
And the, you know, the activity for in-person is, I mean, for distance learning is probably not, you know, good for the in-person learners. So like she said, it is where you're stretched, where you're actually providing a bad experience for both, essentially, if you're trying to juggle it. So, I mean, that's the challenge.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. Michelle, you seen anything in your neighborhood that might help you out?
Well, of course, you know, being an RT, I don't have the direct contact with the students. So in talking to my teachers, they're trying to figure it out as best they can. So like one teacher does a quick warm up, you know, with them, kind of goes over some concept stuff. And then she has them on her own, like, hey, here's the workout. You have, you know, 15, like a short, like 4 minute Tabata or like a short little hit kind of workout. And she lets them go off screen for that. Like, you know, here's your 15 minutes to take care of it on your own. Report back. We'll discuss, you know, like kind of just get a little feedback on what you thought of that activity, how many of you felt, you know, it needed more intensity, how many of you thought was too intense, and kind of have a discussion from there. And then maybe she said she'll do like, you know, they'll do a little cool down or like a yoga stretch, like kind of together. But she's, some of the teachers are torn between all the screen time that they're getting, especially, you know, middle school, because they log on to each class. And then all of a sudden they're in PE and it's like, it's more screen time. So it's, we had a discussion as to how do you find the balance in that. And then if you don't meet with them on screen, it's how do you know they're even doing some of the work that you're giving them also? And then even if you're giving a written assignment, of course they're completing it on screen. So, I mean, she just said like it's just so hard to try and figure it out. But for the most part, she said she does want to incorporate the student voice in letting them decide, like, these are your different workouts, and do that on your own. She doesn't really want to necessarily be on screen with them. But then at the high school level, I know there are a lot of the teachers are just, okay, this is our workout of the day, turn your camera, participate. So there's a lot of, different things happening. And, they're asking me like, so is that right? Is that wrong? And I'm like, well, I can't really say if it's right or wrong because I haven't even done it myself,
Yeah.
So um, I think that's kind of been like the toughest challenge for me as an RT. Like I said, for everything you guys are going through, I cannot say I have like experience, so I would be like you, kind of, try what works, see what does, see what doesn't, and go with your, your feel for it. So, I mean, it's a doozy. This year is, you know, it is what it is. You just gotta try your best. But I do appreciate the effort. And of course, with some teachers still teleworking at home, like, I kind of want to observe what it looks like on their end. But it's like, I'm not going to tell them like, let me come into your house and watch you teach.
Yeah.
But I do want to be able to see because I've heard, a lot of them have multiple devices on because you got to monitor the chat, you got to have the camera on you, and like Aaron said, like a microphone thing, like muting this one, having that one on. There's so many different things that come into play with distance learning. So it's definitely been a trial by error kind of thing for many people.
Well, they're still lucky to have you as a sounding base. That's really important. So I'm glad you're, at least you're in touch with them and finding things out. And you could also ask them, they can record themselves teaching if they want, if they would like to share it. And then maybe you could give them feedback. I know I enjoy getting feedback, like, why don't you try this or why don't you try that? So
for sure.
good job. Good job, Michelle.
And I think too, like when the teachers are asking, like, am I doing it right? I think the important thing to keep in mind is like ask the students, like have them give the students a Google
Exactly.
and see like how's it going for them, right? Are they liking it? Like what other content would they like to use? Are they getting like sick of one thing and they want to go to another? Because again, that's going to help motivate the students if the students think that the teachers like are listening to their opinions, right? So I don't think that there's a wrong or right way essentially in this time. It's just trying to connect with your students and getting them to be physically active, right? And I think part of the screen time is like figuring out with your students like what is the balance, right? And maybe giving them some options where they could be on the screen or off the screen depending on what they want to do.
I think that's super essential is what Aaron said. Connection with the kids. It's so important right now to let them know you understand. It's hard. Like it's hard for us. It's hard for them. It's new. And I know for our students, it took us a long time to get some of our housing kids to have their own hotspot. Even then, it's not working. So it's stressful for them. I couldn't get on, Miss Erickson. I want to see, you know what I mean? So I just try to tell them, I basically want you on camera so I can see you because it makes me feel good. And then they kind of look at it a little differently. So at the beginning of the semester, I did a Google form and just asked them to tell me like what their workout area would look like, what device they're using. Because I know for us, we're using WebEx for our 8th grade team, and it's a little different than Google Meets. And the devices, like if I'm showing a video, I have to ask the kids that are on iPads or Google Chromes, which is the book we gave out, to turn off their camera when they're seeing a video from me. And then that seems to work. So we've kind of gotten through all those good.
And it's such an important part. And I know you all value that, but it's, are we getting that across? And is it really happening with our kids? And it needs to be happening now. And if it's not us sharing that message and making sure that voice is heard, a lot of those kids are missing out. They don't all have parents who will take them to the park or let them ride bike or do things with them at home. And again, what are they getting for their physical self and that, mental, emotional, the whole being. So yeah, I guess just for what you got and in your networks, keep pushing that advocacy and the importance of them moving. And it doesn't have to be rocket science stuff. Just get them up and moving.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I love what you guys are saying. We're focusing on the positive right now, Aaron, as you snuck in, like good teachers do. What I really like what Greg says is like this, or just especially when I was just all live, because I would see my kids. We didn't really talk about how often you guys see it, but I would see them Monday through Friday, a couple homerooms, and then the sad part is I don't see them again for 2 months. But I'd have the same kids for, and same as I do now, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I have them for an hour. But I love, honestly, the accountability. Like, hey, you have a huge audience now. Like, you got to step up your game and be on your A game all the time. Yes, all the time. Because there are people right off the screen right here that are watching you. You know. But I love it. Parents have participated. I love when the little siblings come in and have fun. Yeah, come in. Let's all dance together. Let's do it. I have loved that part because I don't know about you, but I don't ever meet our parents really. They don't have our school's too big. They don't have time for us. Right. So now I'm like, they get to see what we do and we do good stuff. So that part has been awesome. Like I'm actually getting feedback more than I ever have before. And like that end of the day, like makes you feel good. So there are positive things and you got to show up happy and find fun things like sounds that you can put. And I'm wearing wigs and we are getting them up and moving because this is the best part of their day. Yes. If you come sad or even in school, like saying masks are stupid, I hate it. Like they're like, you know, you have to be like, I love my mask and you shield. You guys look amazing. Like you gotta, this is your show. This is the Mrs. Earl hour, especially when you're online. Like we are a dance and a show right now. Anything to get them to smile. I mean, I'm loving it. Like I'm with Greg. Like I've done all new things. I've learned things now that you never thought were due, especially PE. But like, oh, we don't have to do technology. We've been so lucky. Not anymore. But my challenge, and I think I'm lucky, like we do have some at-home learners. That's what we call them, right? The kids that choose to stay home are called at-home learners. And there are a lot. And then, but for us, for their specials, like we just focus on the kids at school and we give them all async work for the kids that are at home learners. But my challenge is like, I don't see the kids very much, you know, once every 2 months, that's horrible. Right. So it's like, how do I know that they're being accountable but they're so busy and stuff. But, does anyone else want to share like how their schedule's working and what are the challenges for them now? Because I could talk forever, so let me shut up and you guys can talk and ask. Not all at once.
Challenges. Okay. I think that this creates a lot of unique challenges, you know, especially for your kids that are there. And like for me at the beginning of the year, I told them, okay, you need to have your video on, you know, contrary to what Aaron had said earlier about cultural things and whatever. But I said, you know, because when we're doing movement and whatever, a lot of our assessment is based on observation, you know, aside from, you know, the verbal responses and whatnot. But I said, you have to have your video on so that we can see what you're doing and we can make sure that what you're doing is correct, you know, that you're doing the movements correctly. So one, you don't get hurt. And two, that if you're doing something incorrect, then, you know, I can fix it or help you to fix it. But then you still have these kids that will not have their video on. And, you know, you kind of assume that, all right, well, maybe they're having technical problems, issues. And I would tend to believe that, like with a lot of my kids. But then there are some that, if they are having technical issues, you'll see them leave because we use Google Meet. So they'll leave the meet and then they'll come back. So you'll see them like pop in and out. So you kind of assume that, yeah, they are having some issues with their device. And then I think you have the other ones. Like I had one just the other day who was not on, and regardless, I'd say, Micah, you know, are you there, Micah? You know, no response, nothing. And then about 25, 30 minutes later, then his video pops on and brother's laying on his bed eating bugles. And I said, hey, man, this is PE, man. You know, you save your little snack time for later. And so I think that, and, you know, as far as like, how do you assess those kids that, you know, if you are using some kind of observation, to do some kind of an assessment for them. And then you have the kids, like when you're doing fitness movements, and they get down and they're doing crunches or whatever else they're doing on the ground, and they don't move their device with them, so you can't see them. All you see is like the top of their head. So it's really unique, and it can be frustrating. But right now I have a student teacher, so I just tell her, we got to go with the flow and do the best you can. I mean, there are some things you have more control over than others. So I'm sure that there are other people that may experience the same thing as I.
For sure. And then it's at some point you're like, well, okay. I mean, we have to be so empathetic, right?
Yeah, like, you do what you got to do, right?
Guess you're not going to have your screen on today. But then sometimes those are the kids that take so much of the attention of the way, like especially in class, right? Like they take so much attention away from the kids. But now when you're virtual, it's like, well, keep going. Guess you're just missing it. I mean, there's only so much you can do.
One of the things, this is from a parent perspective, but I know, like, I think the PE teacher at my son's school, he posts PE stuff every week for like the grade levels to participate in asynchronously, but they've only seen the PE teacher like twice from the first and second quarter so far. And so one of the things that George and I have talked about is like, why doesn't the classroom teacher like encourage, like the teacher has not said a single word about PE until like the morning that the PE teacher is going to come. They say, oh, we have PE today, so we have a different schedule. And so as PE teachers, I was thinking like maybe at the elementary level, we should try to do a better job of like communicating with our classroom teachers about if we are providing material, like asynchronous material for the kids, and get them to promote it so that they, like when you said, Kia, that that you don't see your kids very often, like just even checking in with your classroom teachers and sending them an email like, hey, put this in your Google Classroom or mention this to your students, because like ours is posted on the main website. And as a parent, I don't go check the main website, right? So even though like we value physical education, like I honestly haven't looked at the physical education lessons. And so, but if the teacher said like, make sure you do your physical education this week, then that might be a way to like get the students active and kind of use those lessons that you're creating. So just an idea as you think about communicating and not having that like in-person time with your kids.
Yeah, for sure. And I was really annoying, and I'm like, I need a meeting with you guys because I have 2 kids up and they're not moving either. They're not moving, like they're in a prison cell, right? You have to stay within your cohort, and they're not walking around that much. So I'm like, I got to meet with you teachers. I want to help you with my expertise. So I give them, can you guys see this? And I provide them brain breaks, exercise breaks. And they were very specific. They're like, it can't be longer than 8 minutes or we won't use it. I'm like, what's the easiest way for you teachers? How can I help you? Because I can't physically go in the classroom, too many kids, right? So I created this super easy. This is our actual picture of our gym because kids want that, right? They want to see familiarity. And I push it out to the teachers every Friday, and it's just 3, and you change it because there's 5 million you can find on YouTube. And I push it out to the teachers, and they're super thankful, and they love it. And I include the time, as you can see, and kind of what it is. So the teachers know what it is and like to get ready for it. And I've had really good feedback on that. And I can totally teach someone how to do this. It does not take that long. You guys have questions?
It takes time. That's the thing. It's like so time consuming, and it's like I always tell myself like the kids better appreciate what I'm doing for them. It's like I feel like but that's why we do it, right? It's we plan so that their education is quality. So
yeah. All right, thanks. Hey, Stefan, you want to share a little bit what you're doing?
Sure. As I mentioned, we are an alternative school, so we have very small groups, and PE traditionally has mainly been building relationships, and we really usually work out of a weight room. And we try as a school to have mainly Google Classrooms. So I have a Google Classroom set up, and similar like we heard before, I set up originally I set up out of Google Slide a workout booklet where I want them at least 3 times a week to work out. And again, we're dealing often with lack of motivation. So I keep it very broad what they do. What I do ask them is every week to reflect on the week, you know, how they feel. I try to help them understand that if they move, if they go for walks, or if they do the gardening work at home, how does that make you feel, so that they can kind of get that. For me, the most important thing, that you feel better if you move, if you exercise. And then I'm a big fan, and I think Aaron mentioned that early. I really like Ed Puzzle. I really got into that. It's so easy to find a YouTube, and you can make it easy on yourself and just have multiple choice. I try to put a little bit more sort of like, what do they call it? Higher thinking question in. So I try to, again, I have sort of an outline of what I want. In the beginning, it's a lot about like, why should we work out, motivation, benefits. So I would find videos like this, and then how do you create a workout plan? So I showed a couple videos of that, and then a couple videos of exercises that anybody can do at home easily. And my fear is that I over-ed puzzle them a little bit. But now we move, and now we moved a little bit into the second semester. I started with health, food. So I'm looking at very, very basic, what are the basic blocks of nutritions, that kind of stuff. So I try to kind of have a curriculum, and in that all, of course, my biggest struggle is to get them to log in. It's a huge problem. I also think we meet every day for a half an hour except Friday. That's super tough to do anything really active. Nobody wants to break a sweat for 15 minutes, right? I try to do yoga with them in class. And I know I have to repeat that, because teenagers and yoga, at times they're embarrassed. And then the other thing that's voluntarily, and I'm getting them to do, is download. I have one kid, again, small groups, he's totally into surfing. So I give him the platform to download his surfing videos. And the last thing that I'm right now in the process is, I used to be an avid rock climber. So and that's off the school, right? I don't want the DOE to be involved in that. So I am talking to kids about meeting potentially on a Saturday or Sunday, and then we go to Makapu'u and we go rock climbing. Of course, that is extracurricular stuff, and I need to figure out how do I send that letter home to the parents and how we get there. But again, I'm talking, my biggest class is 3 students. And some classes I have 1 student. I have days where I don't see a single student. And that's for me, the hardest part is to be like in front of the bloody screen, waiting, are they coming? I'm texting and calling my students just as much as I'm on the screen. So that's the hardest part. The beauty is I'm teaching a yoga class to our teachers now on Friday morning. You know, the ones that want, we go behind a haunted building under a tree and we do yoga. And I try to do things, the holo holo running challenge that is going on. So I opened that up to mainly the teachers. I talked to my PE kids and they're all like, nah, not happening. And I was worried too, because it's not cheap if you all of a sudden have 5. I don't mind to sponsor 1 or 2, but we do it as a school. I did sign up a team, and I got 10 other teachers to sign up. So that's
My site is up on the chat. It's just a place where I parked a lot of resources. Because as I email my teachers, all those links would ever get all over the place. So I just wanted to park stuff in one place. It's not necessarily like super pretty, super organized, but of course, with us going all distance learning online, I told myself I gotta do it now because I've been putting it off for years. So that's what I came up with. So I try to update with whatever current information is coming up. So
Well, it's awesome, Michelle. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. We're gonna share out in a second. Before I go over time because I know I'm headed in that direction. I do want to show you some other resources. So if you just came in, Michelle posted her Google Sites in the chat box, and so it's just kind of where she has gathered some resources. So a good resource for all of you. And then at the end of this PowerPoint, which you'll have the link to, it'll be in the Google Drive with everything. I have a bunch of resources for you as well. So there's Shape America and CDC resources, which there's re-entry considerations. So if you're looking for specific guidance from Shape America, which is the National Health and Physical Education group, they have free webinars around health. They have free webinars around PE. So those links are right here. These considerations give specific considerations for like going back to school physically distanced, as well as like social emotional learning things with children. Best practices for delivering online and hybrid PE. HAHPERD, we have on our website a COVID-19 resources page. And then within that page is, so it's right here. And within that page, there's a bunch of different resources. So like all of these things are clickable, and it'll take you to different resources for the online learning. And one that I'll show you that's just, so the health education resources from the DOE are here, as well as physical education resources. Similar to Michelle, I had to scramble to put some things online with grants that we were working with. So we created this website, and it's really specific for a grant that we run called Dearborn Shines, but we made it a little bit broader. So anyway, in here, you'll find tabs for classroom teachers, physical education teachers, and early childhood teachers. And then there's weekly content in here for lessons, and it's all hyperlinked. So we actually have to create lessons on a weekly basis. And this is elementary and middle school, but there's also.
If you want to show us, you can share your screen again.
Oh, I'm not sharing my screen?
No.
Well, that's problematic. Thanks, Haley. Okay, hold on. I lost all of you. So this is the website. HAHPERD's website has all of these resources on here that I was just talking about. So I would encourage you to go on there and click through those. Again, just another place where everything is kind of in one place. And then Nadine, who is the health education at, wow, I can't even remember her title, and I should because my husband has the same title. For health at the state of Hawaii. She created these resources that she allows me to share with you. So there are all kinds of resources here for health education as well. And so I would encourage you to kind of take a look at those. And then again, I just wanted you to have resources to have. So before we ended, I wanted to make sure that I showed you that those were on the end of the PowerPoint. And then this Google folder drive, which is the last slide in the PowerPoint deck that I will email out to you is, and I'll put it in the chat as well, is actually where you'll find the PowerPoint as well as all of the materials that I talked about today. So there's technology tools, Bitmoji classroom stuff. So this is kind of what we talked about today. All right, so I wanted to end before we finish with our conversation with that. And then I just wanted to kind of touch base. Thanks, George, educational specialist. Appreciate it. So I just wanted to end with kind of some, if anybody had questions that they wanted, that came up in their breakout rooms that they thought might be good for everybody to to talk about at the end. We have a couple of minutes left. I'm happy to stay on if you want to stay on later, but we will be respectful of time. So does anybody have any last minute questions that they wanted to ask?
I had asked Sue to share her idea about the bags. Sue, your equipment bag?
I was just sharing that we started at the beginning of the semester, the kids making their own equipment. And I think I'm going to carry that on to when they do come back to the campus. I'm going to have my group of 6th graders coming back November 4th. And it's just kind of cool. They really engage. They really like it. Well, I can't say all of them, but the majority of them seem to like making the equipment. And it's I kind of try to incorporate it into STEM or engineering where they can kind of modify it and try to make it better. And some of them really take it up a notch to the next level. It's kind of fun. So we have our own equipment bags. And so they come in boxes and bags, and some of them carry them around in laundry baskets. And what I did is I just did a shout out to my community and to my faculty and asked for, so we make kettleballs out of milk cartons and, that kind of stuff. And I think, Aaron, you shared that. Is it Gopher or somebody that has the equipment list? That's kind of what I based it on.
Yeah, Gopher has an equipment list for like that of things that you can make at home. So that is one of the links in the PowerPoint. Yeah. And
it's really helpful. That's all. Thank you.
So Greg had a question about teaching live and virtual at the same time. So Greg, I shared a couple of like suggestions, but if you want to stay on, I'm happy to kind of talk about that in depth, kind of like specific to your situation. I know Preston, I don't know if are you still on, Preston?
Yep, I'm on.
Could you share a little bit about your experiences and what you have found helpful maybe for the whole group?
Okay. So I have a couple students that opted out during PE. So when we first tried it in the first couple of weeks, what was challenging was my space is outdoors, so having a power source outside. But so I just making sure my equipment was charged up, but also another challenge was the sun. Sometimes your equipment can overheat. So that was the other challenge. But something I found helpful, I started wearing AirPods during class. So while I was logged into my Zoom, my AirPods were like a live mic. So I told my virtual students during class, because I'm not at the screen all the time, if they got lost during an activity, I would just tell them to unmute themselves. And they can ask their question, and then I would tell them after I'm like dealing with my in-person students, I would go back to the screen. And I tried to carry over activities in person that we kind of did virtually. So our virtual students were kind of still in tune with what we were doing, but and kind of like Sue, so they had to I showed them what equipment we were using in class during that day. So, and they would just have to find something in their homes that kind of reflect what we were using, but as best as they could. Like, for example, we were using hula hoops one day as like circle targets for tossing. So some of them had like jump ropes or just rope, so they just made circles on the ground at their home. So things like that. And I guess like Aaron gave a tip too, not to forget about them. So yeah, that's where the AirPods actually helped. Also, like she said, setting up 2 devices. But what I did was I set up an iPad on a tripod, and it just shoots my class live at the same time. So
yeah,
another challenge was the internet connect. Like sometimes there's like, if you're on the field, the internet connection, depending on how your Wi-Fi is set up, that was a challenging part to figure out what part of my campus or what part of my field I had to place my item on my iPad on. So that was challenging.
Thanks for giving those tips, Preston. I know that you've been doing this for a month or more now, so you kind of have some of those trial and errors under your belt now.
And you might want to ask your administration for hotspots. They are giving discounts for schools for hotspots. So maybe you could get a hotspot for, I know I got one for when I'm outside, and it makes a big difference.
And Greg, if you want some more ideas, I'm sure that we can brainstorm and we can talk offline about that as well. I might be able to connect you with a couple of people that have some experience in it. And it's kind of very specific depending on your school and what equipment you have and what availability of technology you have. I think that is going to dictate like how well you can kind of teach in that live and hybrid setting versus like how you just essentially make it work if you don't have very much technology. So any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. How do people address the like limited space? I mean, there are times when we have students that can only move like 1 or 2 steps laterally either way, and that's about all the space that they have for PE. And so when you're doing like a movement stuff, do they give them like an alternative lesson, or I don't know, how do you address something like that?
Does anybody have, go ahead, Shelly.
I saw something that our and I don't know if I'm trying to think about how it applies in a small indoor setting, but the guy, Kia, you know this, our swim instructors had them standing in a group in a square, 3 sides. And so they were evenly spaced on one line. And then there was another group on across from them, and then a third group on another side, thinking of a square. And then one group would swim this way, and everybody rotated around. And then only one group was kind of moving at the time, and everybody, so there was a start and a finish, and everybody kind of rotated around there. So nobody was interacting with anybody if that was an issue. So I thought that was pretty creative, at least in that swim session. I'd never seen that before, and I was just wondering if that were the case. In our situations, we talked about keeping the group small. So sharing a ball between 2, maybe 3 people, and trying to use rubber, of course, but and keeping that pod of people kind of sharing, but being able to maintain activity or continue activity, and then wearing a face mask while they're doing it, keeping the activity level not too high, but enough in which they could breathe okay. But in our cases, we've been allowed to take it off if the exertion is high and if we are evenly spaced. Like right now, our high school kids are in pickleball, so they're kind of spaced out a little bit more. But I'm just trying to think of how an indoor space might be. If it's an outdoor space, it might be a little bit easier. I don't know if that answers your question.
I know, Sean, so like if we're thinking about in an at-home environment and they like just don't have any space, I mean, this makes our job more difficult as teachers, but trying to come up with what the modification might be for whatever activity you're teaching and just giving them something similar but different to do. So like if they're supposed to be like working on sliding, they're obviously going to only be able to go like 1 step, and so they're going to have to go back and forth while everybody else is going down down down, back back back, right? Or maybe it's just that they're doing something in place. So it kind of depends on that activity, but they're going to have to just essentially get creative and have, like, you can give them examples of what a modification might be. Like if you have limited space, do this. But then I would also challenge the kid to try to come up with how they might be able to do that in their small space. And obviously, you know, talking to them about safety and how they want to make sure that if they do have a small space, like making sure that the ground is at least clear so they're not like stepping on something and twisting ankles and stuff like that. That's just off the top of my head. Has anybody experienced this where they have students that might have that much limited space in a home environment? Go ahead, Sue.
Yeah, the kids are actually, they really do come up. They're really good problem solvers, a lot of them, especially my 8th graders. I do have, you know, students that they tell me they have, at the beginning of the semester, I put out a Google form that asked them what device they're using, if they could give me a snapshot of what their area was, or at least describe how much space they had. Is it inside? Is it outside? And they filled it all out. It was super, super helpful. And then when we do things, I like if we have four, like if I say put 4 targets out, I might tell them to put a target in each corner, or instead of going back and forth, they might have to go in a circle so they get the same space. But that seems to be working for us. But some of them are really, they show me they're working like a 4x4 square. So I don't know if that helps.
John, you should make your student teacher be creative and she can come up with ideas.
Yeah, well, she's been doing a pretty good job, like modifying some stuff. But thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Greg has a question. How do you get the most participation from kids, the most kids, and the most participation during the lesson when virtual? So when you say virtual, Greg, are you talking about synchronous or asynchronous? I guess would be my first question.
I guess live. Yeah, when you're teaching live.
Mm-hmm.
And well, yeah, I guess both. Like, how do I even know, like, if kids are activating my slides? You know, like, I don't know if there's a counter or something, or you know.
Yeah. So when you're teaching live, I think that there's definitely different strategies, right? And I think part of that is setting the expectation up front of what you expect, and then trying to mimic that, but then also like remind students what that expectation is up front. As we get further into the semester, if those expectations aren't set forth like at the beginning, it's hard to kind of go back, right? Just like it would be in a normal classroom. So number one would be setting that expectation for the students. Trying to give students like choice. So if you're doing a live workout with the students, allowing them to do things with modification or extensions. And so you might give them, like, you might be showing them a live workout, but then show them something that they could do that might be lighter, but still participating, or might be extending the task and might be harder. And that kind of gets at that motivation level, where if students aren't very motivated, they can at least be doing something. And it's not nothing. Or if they're bored and they need something more challenging, maybe they can do something a little bit more challenging. As far as like logging on and actually getting them to participate, I don't know, what are some strategies that the teachers have used in the classroom? Does anybody have any examples? So, Greg, could you give me a little bit more context as to like
I guess
what you're experiencing?
Yeah, so like what I'm experiencing, like whoever I was teaching virtual, like they're experiencing the same thing as far as you go in elementary, like your older kids have more participation than your younger kids, or for you, is it the same? And why? You know, my question is why, right? Like, I mean, that's all. Yeah.
So are at the different age levels, is the participation about the same? You experience your older kids having more participation than your younger kids?
Logging on, yeah, just showing up. The older the kids are, the more they show up, and then the younger it goes, the less kids show up to the meets actually.
Okay. And what is the expectation at the school? Is it supposed to be mandatory? Is it like is it suggested?
So we're not grading, and my principal is trying to be understanding of parents, you know. So all of us are just assuming some things from some comments, but we're not getting a lot of feedback from the parents and stuff as to why, you know. We hear from some parents. I mean, you know, but I was just thinking, are anybody else experiencing the same thing? Like, is it common, or is it just like my school, or, you know, I don't know.
I think it's common because the little kids can't do it themselves. You know, like they definitely show up later. There's more issues. It's like, you know, sometimes they're alone. They're left home alone. They don't know how to do it, or like Tutu doesn't know how to log on for them. So it's definitely an issue. It's super hard. I mean, if you send out like a Google questionnaire or something, like how you can help, or like maybe even like video yourself logging on to send to all like the younger kids' parents, of like this, like to make it as easy as possible for them. I don't know. It's hard.
Yeah, step-by-step tutorials have been helpful. I know we're only talking 6th grade, but I know that some of our teachers have younger children and they always bring it up at faculty meetings what's going on. But as teachers, they have suggested, they have sent some tutorials to their kids' teachers. I don't know if they use them or not.
Well, and ultimately, like you can only do what you can do, right? And so you want to try to create content that's going to be exciting for kids, like maybe that's going to like lure them in and get them excited about it. And then maybe on the side, you like post something on your own that's kind of like asynchronous work. So if they're not able to log on live, like having them do something that like giving them at least easy things that they might be able to do, and trying it that way. And then at the end of the day, it is what it is, right? Like you can only do what you can do if your administration isn't holding the students accountable in that realm. And so just try your best to engage what you can, and just remember that, every student that logs on, you're making a difference in their life, and you're like able to help them. And so I would just focus on those that you are able to help, and of course strategize to get more people on, but don't get down on yourself if people aren't engaging. You know what I mean?
I can kind of
And
do this for a second. I supervise student teachers, so I see elementary and high school classes virtually. And so I've challenged the student teachers recently to try to hold their students more accountable when they are hosting that live session. And some of the tips that I've given them is for them to get creative with the square that they have to use of the students. And so even by asking a question or having that content presented to them and then holding the students accountable for being engaged. So that would mean, make a funny face if you like to play tag too, or, thumbs up if you feel this way. Or if for high school, it's, write down on a piece of paper and hold it up to the camera, just so that they're accountable, not necessarily having to turn on their mic and participate, because that takes so much time. So I've challenged my student teachers to kind of use the space that they're given with that square, and with that comes a lot of creative aspects that you have to kind of plan for. But it's seemingly working with the elementary. I'm not sure about the high school yet, but we're going to find out in a couple weeks, I think.
And then the only other thing I would say is like advocating within the school to encourage your classroom teachers to get those kids in the PE classroom, and trying to essentially like advocate for you that they should be logging on, and just that line of communication, right? Like don't forget this, and like having them help you try to work through that engagement. I don't know if that's possible, but it might be an idea.
That's a great idea, Erin. A lot of my kids' teachers did that. They came from their 4th grade class, and the teacher would come with them and make sure they were there. So if you can ask your teachers, if they're coming right from a class, like, hey, can you come with them? Like do it with them. That helps too.
And Greg, what I do is, like with older kids, is I call early on in the school year, I call the parents and ask if I get permission to talk to the kids directly, get their phone numbers. And I actually hand out my private number, and that builds already sort of a trust connection. And I've had no issues that I turn my phone off at night anyway. So, but I had no issues. And as a PE teacher, I always feel like I can call in and check in on them, not complaining about something, right? So often teachers only call when there is an issue. I call and like, how are you doing? How's your health? Just checking in. Do you mind if I can have your son's or daughter's cell phone number? And then I text them and they text me. And so that's building the connection. And I got a lot of kids that way into my classroom. Now, when I say a lot of kids, out of fairness, I have very small classrooms. So if you have 20 kids, it becomes tricky. But if you have small, or if you can single out some that are really needing connections, I share my personal contact information. And that has been super helpful to build the connection, to get them to the classroom.
There are apps too that you could use instead of like a personal cell phone number, like a Remind, or like some of the classroom teachers will use like those different apps to get information out to the kids, or the kids have it on their phone. or you could use like a Google number to communicate and not necessarily use your personal number if you're looking for something other than your personal contact, but kind of meeting the kids where they're at, right, with their line of communication is a good idea. All right, I know that we are way over, and I appreciate everyone staying on. So if you have more questions, I'm happy to stay on longer. But I do want everyone to know that they are free to go if they feel the need to do so. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and hopefully it was helpful in some capacity. The goal is always for maybe people to walk away with one new thing that they were able to take away. So hopefully you got that one thing that you might be able to implement in your class today. But I'm happy to stay on if you have more questions. Otherwise, thank you everybody for being here. And HAHPERD appreciates your engagement, and hopefully you have a good rest of your semester.